Good afternoon, all, and welcome. We will get started momentarily. We're just starting to allow folks into the space. And so we will be able to get started momentarily. Welcome, welcome, everybody. We're allowing some folks to enter the space, and then we will get started momentarily. I want to thank you for joining us for this conversation this afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome. We will get started momentarily. Just going to give you folks a few more minutes to enter the space. Aye, aye. So we would like to welcome all of you to the conversation, um, and very excited to be with you today. We look forward to an interesting dialogue about this space of equity, diversity, and inclusion, and definitely are excited to introduce you to our panelists as well as engage in some interesting conversation. What we will start off with is we have a nice Slido presentation in which we just want to get your feedback around some of what you're observing within your organizations. And so our first question, we want to give you some time to reflect on this. What 2 to 3 words come to mind when you think about the essentials of an inclusive workplace? We're going to give you a few moments to reflect, and we want to see the results popcorned out. That's a good one. Belonging, authentic, open dialogue, safety, belonging. Belonging seems to be a strong one here. Open dialogue, empathy, collaborative, diversity, empathy, collaborative. These are some really great insights. Honesty, welcomed access. Listening, understanding, helpful, diverse, belonging. diverse groups of people in a welcoming environment, all critical as we're thinking about what we appreciate about the experiences within our workplaces, and how we bring our full selves to these experiences. So we're going to give about another second or so and shift to our next prompt. Active listening, understanding, respect, honesty, and communication. It seems like we're seeing the trends: communication, belonging, understanding, trust. Let's shift to the next prompt. So this question is based on your understanding. This is just you as an employee. What is your assessment of your organization's commitment to prioritizing equity, diversity, inclusion as a core principle? So there's that ready or active, underway, emerging. They know it's a priority issue, but really trying to build their capacity and understanding. Resistant. There might be some discomfort around, again, what that could possibly look like. And so this is some interesting data here. 63% so far, 60%, 30. It's good to see that resistant number is low. We've certainly seen the uh, business imperative around centering equity, diversity, inclusion in organization. Emerging, we know that there's opportunities to begin that. And so hopefully those of you that are in emerging organizations or a resistant organization can take some helpful insights from this conversation as well. I'm going to turn it over to our President and CEO, Franklin Baker, to get us started.
Thank you so much, Wayne. Welcome to all of you for joining this important conversation. I'm Franklin Baker, the President and CEO for the past 8 years of United Way of Central Maryland. Thank you all for joining us in this important discussion today. So we all know this, many of us on the call, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives are really, really at a crossroads today. In many respects, DEI is on attack, various parts of the country. Various partners are struggling in various parts of the country to keep the momentum going. One of the things I wanted to share with this body today is DEI for us at United Way of Central Maryland is here to stay. We really do believe it is part and parcel of our growth and our expansion of incredible work on the ground. We believe it's part and parcel of why we're really succeeding at the work we're doing with neighbors, residents, and other partners. We are not in any way relenting in this space. It is truly part of our return on investment. There's a strong business case for DEI. And so I just wanted to share with this body, this particular organization. I know there's several others, including the folks who represent our panel today, who really believe in this work and believe it's vital to remain front and center of conversations that are important today. And so just wanted to make sure that was clear from my perspective. We really do believe that our mission, our focus on equity, access, and opportunity is really a key driver of things happening in a positive perspective on the ground with partners like the represented by our incredible panelists today. So we are continuing to drive it very, very hard. We listen carefully. We really do our very best to understand what our neighbors want and need and allow them to drive the results in their neighborhood. It's very, very important. So we really honor and we leverage the innate strengths on the ground, in the various neighborhoods that we support through our neighborhood strategy. And it's so important for us to do whatever we can to work to dismantle the various barriers that many of our residents face day in and day out. So that is so important for us as an organization. And we invest in the overlooked, the under-resourced individuals, the various neighborhood groups that many of us are familiar with, and other nonprofits, some represented on this call today. We want to make sure we're doing everything we can to invest, particularly in those organizations that are led by Black, Indigenous, people of color, or BIPOC, those who may not have access to the types of resources maybe some of the other groups in their community have. So we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to close gaps to make sure we're bridging the divide. It's so important to us as an organization. And so today you'll truly hear from some extraordinary leaders. I probably couldn't have put together a better panel in their own respective lanes, doing incredible work for awesome organizations. So they have deep, deep expertise, and they bring a lot to the table. So I'd like to now just stop and introduce the moderator of today's discussion, Wayne Young. Wayne brings a wealth, and I mean a wealth of knowledge, and experience, and passion to today's topic. As our Associate Vice President of Equity and Special Initiatives, she's really working diligently day in and day out to just sort of shape and drive our organizational's journey on equity. So Wendy, we'll turn it to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Franklin. And certainly a privilege to be associated with this work, particularly at United Way, where we know and see that this commitment to this effort comes from the very top. So not only are we seeing that from our leadership, as evidenced with our introductory comments from our president and CEO, but we're also seeing that at the governance level with our board of directors as well. And so certainly within our organization and through our partners, we're continuing to make sure we're doing what we can to really provide what's needed where it's needed, but doing so with the lens of identifying those gaps and barriers that are in place for many in our community. So welcome to today's conversation. We're certainly thrilled to have you join us for such an important dialogue. And we know as an organization that promoting equity and access in all that we do, we thought it best to bring some local subject matter experts who will be sharing their unique perspectives and insights in this discussion. We certainly appreciate your presence and your commitment to this learning journey. Know that you being in this space really signals your ideals and signals your willingness to embrace this continual learning process and determine how to ultimately lead with an inclusive mindset that centers opportunity and fairness for all. So I am thrilled at this moment to introduce our three panelists here to share their unique insights with us. Raymond Jackson, Tanya Odom, and Chrissy Thornton have extensive experience in creating inclusive workplaces. We are fortunate to have them with us today. Our first panelist I'll introduce is Raymond Jackson. Raymond is the Global Head of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Corporate Responsibility at T. Rowe Price. He is Vice President at T. Rowe Price Group and a trustee of the T. Rowe Price Foundation Board. Prior to T. Rowe Price, he was with Morgan Stanley as National Diversity Officer. And prior to that, Raymond had a 20-year career with Northwestern Mutual, where he held roles in technology and corporate strategy, HR, and led enterprise diversity, inclusion, and campus development. He's been recognized for his passion, leadership, and commitment to diversity and inclusion, and he has received the Patriot Award from the Department of Defense and was recognized by Black Enterprise Magazine as a top Black executive in corporate diversity for several years. Raymond has a bachelor's from University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, an MBA from University of Phoenix, and completed the Leading and Managing Global Business Executive Program at Yale University. Our next panelist, Tanya Odom, is the Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion at CareFirst. Tanya has over 25 years experience in strategic diversity planning and leadership. As Director of DEI at CareFirst, Tanya leads the company's continued commitment to recruiting, developing, and retaining a diverse and inclusive workforce. Prior to CareFirst, Tanya was a senior executive with the Federal Bureau of Investigations, the FBI, serving as the Assistant Director for the Office of Equal Opportunity Affairs, and she was the FBI's inaugural Chief Diversity Officer. Under her leadership, the FBI implemented initiatives that impacted their values and resources around diversity, how they collect data, their mentorship opportunities, pipeline development. Tanya has also served in various legal and management positions with the EEOC, including as a civil rights attorney, chief administrative judge, and senior attorney advisor. Tanya has a BA from Howard University and a JD from University of Maryland, Francis King Carey School of Law, and she is admitted to the Maryland Bar. Lastly, we have Chrissy Thornton. She is the president and CEO of Associated Black Charities, a racial equity organization that works as an educator, advocate, supporter, and convener to address and eliminate barriers created by structural racism and advance long-term solutions that create new opportunities for Black people to thrive. She's a native New Yorker, has a lot of high energy, very creative and outgoing, and she brings a wealth of experience in the design and facilitation of organizational diagnosis, as well as large-scale events and staff development activities. She has authored 6 books. She's a franchise owner and believes in the power of entrepreneurship. She's a founding member of the Black Leadership Circle. She serves as on the Executive Alliance and the Baltimore Women's Civic League and a number of local boards, including the Baltimore Committee, Baltimore Stage, and Morgan State University's College of Liberal Arts. Chrissy has also been recognized as a top 100 recipient from the Daily Record, Baltimore Sun's top 25 women to watch, and a Power Shift honoree with the Baltimore Business Journal. She has a business degree in organizational management and is a sought-after speaker. So quite the panel we have before us, and certainly grateful to have this conversation with you all. So we're going to go ahead and dive right in. First, we know if we're paying attention to the landscape and the conversations around equity, diversity, and inclusion, and the heightened scrutiny that efforts that have been underway to dismantle some of this progress, we know that it's crucial for organizations to really strengthen and lean in to solidify those efforts. So as we are navigating this period, what steps do you believe are essentials for organizations to take to move their work forward? I'll start with Chrissy.
Okay, thank you. First, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you all for having me. I have the honor and the blessing over my life to be able to talk about these things all the time, which I'm very passionate about. As the leader of a racial equity organization, though, to answer your question, I find myself even walking a fine line right now of acknowledging the equity work that needs to happen, the priority it needs to be, and the urgency around it, and then also trying to conform in some ways to a landscape that wants the conversation to be a little bit more palatable, to be more acceptable, and working with institutions, some of which fund my organization, that are deviating from the concept of DEI altogether and want it to be packaged and presented and a cute little bow tied on it in a different way. I found myself almost, disappointed in how I was starting to, I think, conform to the current landscape of conversation, right? Like to become more acceptable just to get the resources that my organization needs. And then I had like an epiphany that it's not the time to back down from DEI, belonging, inclusion, equity work. In fact, quite opposite, it's the time to double down. And so when you ask what is essential, or what are essential activities and actions for organizations to take, it really is to reconfirm a commitment at this point, like Franklin did at the top of this call, and like others have done. It's time to draw the line in the sand and to, I think, articulate your organization's commitment to the work. We all know that it needs to be done. We all know what sits on the other side of progress when it's done the right way. But right now we're in such a volatile and polarized landscape and climate. We need people to kind of tell us where they stand and to stand firm on that. And so I say that organizations first need to reaffirm their commitment to the work, and then they need to be open to transparency and accountability around it. There's some great examples right here in Baltimore of organizations who are not only doing the work, but have evaluation and assessment tools to determine whether or not the work is really moving the needle forward for humanity. Because at the end of the day, if lives aren't being changed and positively impacted by the work, then it's very performative, and it's not, at the end of the day, helping us get where we need to be. One great example I love to tout is GBMC here in the Baltimore area. They're doing a great job. They actually publish a monthly, very transparent report that tells how they measured up to their goals and whether they missed them. Honestly and transparently, whether they missed them, and then what action steps they'll put into place to help to get there. So I would say reaffirming the commitment and then being accountable and transparent in the journey and in the process.
Thank you, Raymond, and then we'll have Tanya chime in.
Yeah, happy to add to that. And good afternoon, everyone. It's certainly great to be here. And I share certainly Chrissy's excitement that we get to do this as a part of our day job. So we do this every day. And I think building on what Chrissy shared around the importance of having that commitment is also the business case. We've always had a really strong business case for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And at times like this, it's important to reground your organization and yourselves and why this work is important to your bottom line. I think that's a great way to bring your organization along. And the last piece that I'll add is more tactical, but it's important in this kind of this litigious environment, is doing an inventory of what are the programs you're delivering, what are the experiences that you're creating, and understanding what's the risk level. Not that you would stop that work, but at least acknowledging that we've got some risk here and we'll take this risk and this is why. I think that's an important element of really having a well-rounded strategy around diversity and inclusion, and certainly backing it up with accountability, as Chrissy shared earlier.
Thank you. Tanya?
Great. Well, also, I'd like to say it's really great being here and being part of this conversation. Just to echo what Chrissy and Ramon have said, I really think that now is the time for us to lean in and not back away from this type of work. We have individuals that want to change the conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and some organizations have actually done that. But I think we need to be clear and transparent in communicating our vision and values around DEI, not only internally, but externally as well. Why it matters, why are we doing this work? And more importantly, how it aligns to our organizational mission, vision, and goals. And so does it align to our strategic objectives as an organization, and how it really helps us be better as a company, be better of how we engage within our communities, and what the value of DEI is for the organization.
Thank you. You raise an interesting point. I think some of the confusion is often also baked in the perception that when efforts around DEI are sort of a zero-sum game, that it's only been to the benefit of a few and that it doesn't benefit the whole. And so what we want to know is how can we help to shift that perspective and really help to reinforce that DEI is not just benefiting this one group, that it truly does benefit the entire organization overall. I know, Ramon, you touched on the business case, so Ramon or Tanya, if you want to chime in.
Certainly happy to start. And Tanya was just there around the business strategy. So I think the more that we treat this work like a strategy and not something happening off to the side, it certainly shows how you get the best out of your talent. And that's your full talent profile, not just Black and brown professionals and women and individuals of color, but your full workforce. And also, how does this strategy impact your bottom line? And for T. Rowe Price, how does it help us attract clients and retain clients? And I imagine for your organizations, whether you are in our industry or others, how does it impact your ability to bring in clients and increase satisfaction rates? I think specifically, Wayne, to your question around how do you have the tough discussions around meritocracy and unconscious bias, and they come up all the time for Tanya and Chrissy and I, and likely for you all as well. And for me, it really is a moment that matters in terms of having really tough dialogue and straight talk with individuals around why, when we talk about diversity and inclusion, they automatically go to, we're just talking about Black and brown people, or we're talking about lowering standards. For us, it's about how do you create access? And that's what Franklin said in the front end, creating access for everyone to be able to contribute fully, which also means white men. There's been a lot of research around bringing your full and best self to the workplace, and this notion of covering in terms of, and what that ultimately means is that when you show up in the workplace, you cover parts of yourself. And that research also shows that white men also cover in the workplace to a lesser degree, depending on their dimensions of diversity, but really bringing white men into this conversation is an important tactic around driving D&I. And the last piece that I'll add that's really important is really being transparent around what equity is and what equality is. And what I found is that many people confuse those two words, and they think that we're just giving Ramon something different because he happens to be Black. And what we're saying in this notion of equity is, for a T. Rowe, we say equity are the actions that we take to reach equality. So similar to your homes, if you've got multiple children, you give them different things because they need different things from you. The same thing applies in the workplace. And when you begin to talk about this work in that way, people begin to think about it differently. And some certainly kind of move to the center. There'll likely always be some that will just not get it. But when we talk about the work in that way, aligned to the business strategy, I find that more people are open to learning more and leaning into this work more so than leaning out.
And I would add too, I agree with everything that Ramon has said, is we really need to focus on educating and communicating, right? Oftentimes we have the majority population, not all the time, but sometimes it's white men thinking that this work really isn't about them. And when we talk about diversity, diversity includes everyone. So we're all diverse in our different ways. I always tell the story when I was at the FBI, I had a small team that worked with me in the diversity space. And I was always trying to encourage diversity within the FBI. And people would come to me and say, oh, well, your team is so diverse. How were you able to do that? And my response was, my team is not diverse. We're all Black and brown. And so if I'm really trying to embrace diversity and make sure that this is about everyone, it's not just about those that identify as a minority or a marginalized group. We have to make sure that we're including everyone within the conversation. And so that means white men, that means, people that are in the majority. And so we really just have to make sure that we are including everyone in the conversation and really addressing the myths that surround diversity. When you mention diversity, it's like a trigger word for people. Oh, you're going to bring in less qualified people. And that has nothing to do with diversity. We're really trying to make sure that we're providing equal opportunity to everyone. So everyone has an opportunity to succeed, creating environments where everyone can thrive and making sure that there's equity in that process. So, just challenging those different types of myths that diversity is just for minorities, and that when we talk about diversity, we're talking about bringing in less qualified people. And those are definitely not what we're talking about.
I think I'd like to add too, I tend to be a little bit less apologetic about the whole conversation and less willing to emphasize how it benefits all people, because I think we live in a what about me society and culture, right? The all lives matter world where we feel like we have to dilute the messaging to make sure that people don't feel excluded. The truth is everything that has been said so far is absolutely the truth. The messaging has to be inclusive. We have to communicate the benefits for all people. We have to engage at all levels of the organization. But the real deal is the difference between the equity and equality, and really giving people the opportunity to learn about that, to learn the historical nature of why equity and equality are two different things and why equity is so necessary, and to convince people that it's simply the right thing to do. I think too often we try to make it work and we try to make the proposition that it benefits everybody. And of course, there's a financial possible gain and a business proposition. But at the end of the day, we need to do this work. Why? Because it is the right thing to do. And if you look at historically how some communities, whether it's women, whether it's people of color, whether it's, queer people or other communities have been marginalized, and you really needle into the generations, the centuries of, harm and disinclusion and marginalization, then people, when we're willing to really have that conversation, must start to see that equity then becomes the very right thing to do. And I think we have to do more of that and less, of the sales pitch of convincing people that they have something to gain, and instead really bring people into just being good people and being decent and humane people. And so I know in corporate settings, we have to focus on the bottom line, but at the end of the day, we also have to focus on just being decent human beings. And I think when you really start to talk about the experiences of whole communities, you can get people to see. Too often they don't know because they don't talk about it. They're not exposed to the history. But when they are, we can convince people that we need to do this work and it benefits you because you want to be a decent human being and it's the right thing to do.
And Chrissy, I agree with that 100%. And that's why I think we all have to lean in because this work requires courage, and commitment. The issue sometimes is that all people just aren't good people,
Not at all.
I've been in this line of work for the longest. time, and before getting into diversity, equity, and inclusion, I was an employment attorney, and so I did discrimination cases. And some people just don't get it. They're not empathetic. They don't think it matters to them. So why should we care? And why should we be involved in it? And just when we look at the power structure at a lot of organizations and in this country, you've got to bring people in. So how do you bring people in? And sometimes it is, the business case that it matters to you financially. But then also, thinking about personally, like, are you a good person? This is the history. Realize how there have been these inequities over a period of time, and that by making sure that we have more equitable environments, it's not really taking anything away from you. It's just difficult when we realize that, you have this pie and certain people want all of the pie, right? Not willing to give just one slice. And so it's a challenge, and it's, I would say, challenging doing this work. But I agree with you 100%. We do have to try to appeal to people's, humanity, that this is a human issue.
And I think one of the pieces, not to take us off task, Wayne, but I'm loving it. It feels like we're like on a couch somewhere having like the real discussion. So you all get the experience of having the real discussion. And I think one of the things that has felt different to your question, Wayne, over the last probably 2 years, but certainly the last year or so, is that there's been this difference around the spectrum of what is the right thing. Or what I think there was a comment around like moral versus the business imperative, like in terms of how someone describes for themselves what moral means. Like that spectrum, it feels different now than it was probably 7 or 8 years ago when most folks would agree this is what being a good human means. That it's a further apart there. So I think for us and that lead organizations, I think everyone on this call is certainly in a leadership space in some way, is barring the differences in definition, what do we expect of you in our workplace? In the spaces that you get to hang out with Chrissy or Tanya or Ramon or Franklin and Wayne, and it's something at T. Rowe Price that we say is when you show up in here, this is what we expect of you, and hopefully along this journey, you're going to pick up some additional pieces that make you a better person at home as well. So I think that's where we've had to do some shifts to kind of to that balance around what Chrissy was sharing around be a great human, let's do the right thing, and what does it mean for you inside this organization?
So you all lift some interesting points. Certainly at United Way, we prioritize that as a, really helping people to understand as they move along in this journey. But so you've bought in, you're a champion, you're an ally, this needs to move forward, but you're aware of the divisions that exist. What are some strategies that allies and champions in this space can employ to talk about the imperative in a way that really brings people together and does create this sort of stronger sense of unity and purpose?
I think it's rooted in storytelling and people being willing to share their personal experiences, and that's across marginalized communities and allies. I think when people, we talk about the humanity of it all and how that affects the business case. In an environment when people see each other as people, then they can share their experiences and also share their commitment to the work. And I think as you want people to kind of sign on and buy into it being a shared approach to and a shared purpose within the organization, you have to create safe spaces for people to share their personal stories.
Yeah, and I would say, really giving people the opportunity to create those stories or have those stories. People have to be authentic. A lot of people will talk about diversity, but you can tell that they're really not walking that walk. They have not really engaged with a lot of people that are different than them. And so providing opportunities for people to learn from others, to experience different things, I think is helpful as well.
I think in addition to what certainly Chrissy and Tanya have shared, I mean, you think about, this is some of the corporate pieces around having learning paths and different training opportunities for folks to actually come and understand historical pieces that got us here. So really rooted in fact and experience has been a great way to get folks like open to, we didn't get here by accident. We're not talking about equity today because we woke up today and realized that life wasn't fair. There were some structural pieces that happened that got us here. And it's our job to dismantle those. So we've done certainly training pieces. We've done mentoring pieces where we helped our leaders understand what is it like to be a person of color inside our firm? What is it like to be a woman in our firm? What is it like to be a queer person in our firm? And I think to Chrissy's comment earlier, because you know this person and someone that you've known for 3, 5, 7 years is sharing with you how hard it is for them to show up, it means something. So I think those are the pieces where you start to activate allies, at least with inside of structures and organizations. So those are a couple of things that I think can help along the line of just building that buy-in and that shared purpose.
So what about managing resistance? We had one of our prompts earlier talking about the levels of which the readiness and some hesitation, and then there was that bucket around some of the resistance. How do you suggest one that is an employee in an organization and, you know, they sense that there might be some discomfort based on just some of what's been shared?
When I talk to different corporate leaders, one of the things that we focus on is how some of this work gets lost at the middle management level. A lot of times the top leaders are bought in, believe it or not, or at least on paper, they're bought in, right? They've provided the space, the opportunities, and even the resources, and a lot of the work gets lost in translation somewhere in the middle management level where people aren't as bought in. They aren't as invested in their careers and their jobs with the company or in the mission and values of the organization. And so I think that is the type of resistance that sometimes goes unnoticed until people are harmed in the organization. And then you're trying to track down, how did this happen? We're so committed to DEI and we have all of these things in place, but it's not really, manifesting the way that it should. And so I think resistance has to be managed top down. It has to be unacceptable. There have to be consequences for not going along with what the organization's commitments are. And it really is a leadership, oversight to make sure that there is no deviation from what we've decided we're committed to. Too often people are suffering while the leader is somewhere touting what a great job the organization's doing with equity. And so I think that is so important to point out. A lot of the resistance is not at the top and not at the bottom. It tends to be in that authority tier somewhere in the middle of the organization.
Yeah, I think most of us talk a lot about zero tolerance, for bad behavior and, being, not having your D&I house in order. And then when it comes down to an issue, we don't address it. So there is a lack of kind of faith in the zero tolerance. I think for me, it comes down to, for us trust, around associates that are leaning into D&I and to, I think the comments earlier, they're sharing their story, sharing their experience, being vulnerable and not feeling supported. And that happens certainly when words and actions come together and make and certainly align in that regard. So that zero tolerance piece is certainly important. I think from a resistance side, it's also going to be like when you see something, like how are you addressing it? Like, are you having the tough discussions around privilege? And when that, there are some words that we know are trigger words in the D&I space, so we find other ways to say that. And my thing, let's talk about it. If we know that a leader is struggling with privilege or has stepped away from the work or has some concerns, let's have that conversation, whether it's one-on-one or in another setting. Let's talk about and unpack it. And more often than not, when you've had some time to help them understand, they tend to come around. I've been in the work for quite some time, and most of the folks that I've worked with are certainly senior than me in terms of age. And many of them came through this work probably back in the 80s and 90s when there was a lot of blame, shame, and guilt around D&I. So they're kind of harboring some old tapes that were played a long time ago. So we've had to pull those tapes out and re-talk about what does it mean to be inclusive in this environment and what do we expect of you. So I've had to give some grace, but also retrain on some things. I see Chrissy and Tanya nodding on that one. They've probably been in that space too.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, Chrissy, you singling out like the middle managers is so important because I think oftentimes we leave them out. We're talking about getting that commitment from the top level and then how it impacts employees. But if you are a first level supervisor or people leader, in that position, you have so much influence on the experience that your employees have within the workspace. And so I know at Care First, every year we have a week of equity in action. And during that week, we provide learning opportunities so that individuals can be exposed to different perspectives, learn a little bit more about what it means to create an inclusive culture, what impact individual actions and corporate actions have on the environment. And then also have an opportunity for our employees to go out into the community and volunteer. And so what does that mean and how do we show up within the community? But really getting those middle managers that have the most influence, I believe, on the workplace culture to realize that they have a role to play and that they are accountable for making sure that we're creating those inclusive work environments. And so I always like to say, you know, with either diversity training or learning opportunities or just our programs and policies, that we're really trying to change hearts and minds. But if we don't get you to change your heart and mind, we are going to change your behavior. And so this is what your expectation is if you work within this company, because we are all trying to create the environment where all employees can thrive and that it's inclusive for everyone. And so if you're not doing that, there are consequences for it.
Can you talk a little bit more about, and each of you can share a perspective around this notion of accountability? What does it look like to implement those components within this work? I know oftentimes, again, focusing on hearts and minds, we don't certainly want to be punitive. Oftentimes, you know, where we discourage, the punitive nature might discourage those that are beginning the journey to really lean in. But then there's also what you all outlined, something to be said for if there aren't consequences for some, that's what it takes for action to move forward. So would love to hear your perspective around the notion of implementing accountability measures within this.
I think accountability is measurable. And so, you know, none of this has to be subjective. It can be based on the feedback from the people who have lived experience within the organization. And too often we're too scared to create environments where people can give feedback in a way that does not penalize them, right? I worked with an organization, very large organization, corporate leader who said, we surveyed all of our employees. We have 10,000 employees and not one of them said that they had any issue with, you know, disinclusion or racism or equity or sexism or ageism or any of these things. And so I immediately said that that is because you have not created a space safe enough for them to be honest. There's no way to believe that we experience all these things in the world and then we get into the ecosystem of work and they no longer exist. The question is, you know, knowing they're going to exist, are they improving? And we can only answer that question by asking the people who have lived experience within the organization. And so we have to survey, we have to create, you know, opportunities for people to share honestly, openly, and candidly what their experiences are in the organization. Having come from environments where I did have to make claims about being uncomfortable or mistreatment or abuse in the workplace. And I watched them be explained away by, you know, perhaps management who felt like people were good-natured and had just slipped up, or people, you know, had misstepped but didn't mean it, or there wasn't enough harm done, or whatever the case is. You have to ask people, you have to hear from them, and then you have to react to what they're telling you. And so I think accountability is super measurable. It's easy enough to figure out if your environment has become more inclusive or hasn't. Too often we get into, you know what, we need 3 Latino people, we need 1 Black person and a handicapped person, and then we're good. You can't measure inclusivity that way. You have to actually talk to people and find out what their lived experience is every single day. Because I can guarantee you, if you needle down to creating those safe spaces, you will find the pain points that are harming your retention, that are harming your bottom line, that are harming people bringing their best selves to work and really actively participating in growing the goals of and meeting the goals of the organization. We have to be willing to measure that feedback and then look at that feedback against the goals of the organization.
Yeah, I think accountability is so important. And one of the things I oftentimes say, you know, inside T-Row and outside of T-Row is that accountability without clear expectations is harassment. I'll say it one more time. Accountability without clear expectations is harassment. So when you think about this D&I work, being really clear with what you expect of people. So we've set success measures for our leaders around goals and KPIs. We send out an annual performance goal to every one of our 7,500 employees that talks about what we expect of them in terms of behaviors and engagement. And that means now when you're at least having your performance conversations twice a year, you can talk about how have I shown up, where have I fallen short, and now I can hold you accountable. I think too often we talk about D&I and other things, whether it's in HR or outside of HR, and we're holding folks accountable and they're like, why are you talking about this again? Like they don't understand it's their job. So I think we have to be really clear on what we expect of people, and then we can hold you accountable to those behaviors.
Thank you. We certainly notice here at United Way to the point about creating those safe spaces. We've been intentional about our employee surveying to that point about, you know, you're sharing input and you don't feel safe, and what can we do to bake in those measures so people do feel comfortable sharing their insights. And so those areas around where those gaps are and beginning to really hold us accountable are so critical. Would love just your insight as I shift to one of our final questions before we open up for a few opportunities for Q&A. So let's say for some reason you are at an organization that has not started this journey, but you are interested in really getting it underway. Starting from scratch, you're not necessarily a leader. You are an employee that just wants to see this move forward. What would some advice or resources or insights would you recommend for that person that is, you know, they're ready to dive in, they see the need and just are overwhelmed with where to begin?
I'll start by saying that everyone is a DEI professional.
Yes.
Certainly after George Floyd, 2020, everyone stepped in, everyone was certified, licensed, and you know, ordained to be a practitioner, and that is not the case. And so I think a little bit what we miss is that we talk about good intention, people fuel the fire, but this is a skill set. It comes with preparation. It comes like anything else. Like if you wouldn't just you know, ask someone who raised their hand to perform your surgery. There are practitioners that are studying this work, that are studying the practice of it, and organizations too often try to push this forward without engaging with those practitioners. And so I would say that number one, to recognize that really truly implementing the work should be done in partnership with people who are trained to do it. The other thing is that too often the ownership is put on employees, and this is not going to be probably the most agreed upon part. I am very indifferent on employee resource groups. There are some great things that come out of them, but I also think it puts the burden on marginalized people to change the culture and environment of the organization, right? And it is another function that is brought forward where there's no compensation and the ownership is now on you to change an organization's culture. What I prefer, especially for organizations, or what I would recommend who are just kind of getting their toe wet, is to look at DEI committees that have diverse representation, that are, you know, pulled together with people who have at least the shared commitment to move it forward, and use that as a catalyst to then, you know, try to gauge where the organization is, you know, what, you know, strategies might be beneficial based on what the current culture is. But putting the ownership on well-intentioned employees who already feel marginalized, to me, just seems like too much to ask. But I think you can get a group of people together with diverse representation that can help move the work forward in partnership with a professional practitioner.
And
Yeah.
I definitely agree with that, Chrissy, because this is a profession, right? And you have people that are constantly raising their hand. I want to help out. I want to do this. I want to lead. But you really, I mean, need to do your research. And there are a lot of resources out here that can help companies develop a well-intentioned and oiled machine in terms of, and I won't say it's a machine, but in terms of really doing this work. And my recommendation is you need to find someone that can lead the diversity efforts, the diversity and inclusion efforts within your organization, because it does require a skill set. And I personally believe in employee resource groups. I think, Chrissy, you and I were on a panel before talking
I know.
Yeah, but
It depends on what day you catch me. One day it's okay. The next day I'm like, ugh.
But I agree. They should not be responsible for changing the culture within an organization or leading DEI efforts, because it is a collaborative duty. It's not their main job. They're not getting paid for it generally, right? And so you need someone that can lead the efforts and then leverage employees that want to do the right thing to help move the work forward. And so I know at CareFirst, that's how we use our employee resource groups, really as a fourth multiplier in terms of doing this work. But I agree wholeheartedly, you need someone that has the skill set and the experience to lead the work if you really want to effectuate change within your organization.
I think the only piece I would add quickly, I know, Wendy, you want to go to Q&A beyond what certainly was already shared, is that certainly you are an employee and you get to have an experience that the company needs to care about. So I would say raising that question to someone in leadership around, hey, what's the firm's position around DE&I, and set your desire that, hey, I think the firm can do more in this arena. And I think I would then go to what Chrissy and Tanya have shared around a practitioner, a consultant, a counsel, but you raising that concern or the opportunity for that leadership team member, I think we'll get that on the table for conversation without you having to own it, but you certainly can raise the expectation.
Thank you. Certainly, we've seen that at our local United Way as well, bringing in, having the opportunity to bring in some consultants to help us along in this journey. And it is important to have that expertise. I'm very big on, to Christy, the point you raised where everybody became an expert overnight the result of, so organizations that maybe they were touching HR all of a sudden had this whole area where they were, supposedly able to be D&I experts as well. And so you see the impact of the work if you don't bring in the right folks. So definitely thank you for sharing that. So we've got about, I'd say, a few minutes. Want to open it up for if there are one or two questions. We want to invite anyone to come off mute. If you would just raise your hand so we would know to call on you. Tracy.
Good afternoon. First of all, I just want to say how much I really appreciated this discussion. I had the opportunity to lead our EDI in a department at my organization, so I could certainly relate to when you're saying that it takes a committee. And I find that it's helpful when the committee helps to do the work as well, because it is a lot to take on. You mentioned about the importance of having a skill set. So I was just wondering, do you have any advice in terms of how to maybe gain more of a skill set? I mean, I was one of those people, just happened to be an employee that says, hey, okay, I'll do it. So just wanted to know if you have any advice on that. And my second question, which is totally sort of different, just want to know what your thoughts are on the term that's been sort of thrown around over the years, civility, when it comes to the workplace, just not always understanding. So what are you really saying? Who is that really directed to? So anyway, that's a two-part, and for the sake of time, feel free to only respond to one of the questions.
Shameless Associated Black Charities plug. We are working on a Train the Trainers course for DEI practitioners. It's something that'll be housed under our ABC Academy. It's in the works and would love to share that. And part of the impetus behind that is that there are just so many, I'm going behind practitioners who, touted expertise. But the first part of any DEI work that has to be done with an organization is an organizational assessment. And so unless you have that capability, the DEI work can't really even, start in the right way. And so it is a skill set. And we have so many people out who in some cases are doing harm to organizations and having them believe that they're pushing the needle forward when they aren't. And so it's very important to our organization to begin to train people and to certify them. And to give them the tools and the resources and the guidance they need to do the work, not only effectively, but responsibly. And so that's coming down the pipeline for ABC.
Okay, thank you. I'll look out for
And
that.
that'll be big. I think what Chrissy's creating is huge. I mean, there's some on university campuses as well. It probably won't be as targeted and tailored as what Chrissy will create. So I certainly want to endorse what she's creating, but there are some on a number of campuses. Cornell, there's probably 4 or 5 others as well that people are taking. So there's a number of options that will help you kind of build that muscle.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and certificates at different universities as well. And then SHRM, I think, offers a certification, a training course with DEI. And then really just leveraging people that are doing the work and have been doing the work for quite some time. People reach out to me all of the time when they're just starting out in positions after they've received certificates, just to talk about best practices, how to move the needle forward, how to assess, like Chrissy and Ramon said the organization how to do a barrier analysis, because you can't kind of fix things unless you know where those gaps are. And so these are all things that, a practitioner, once they learn these things, can really build an effective DEI program in the organization.
Thank you.
And Tracy, that was SHRM, SHRM. I think you were looking for that acronym.
Oh, sorry. Society of Human Resource Managers.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I
Thank
just want to add really quickly, Wayne, because I think this is so important. And I don't know where everyone's representing, but DEI work in the Baltimore region is going to be different than DEI work in some other places. And it needs to be nuanced. And so one of the things that we talk about is like the demographics and the economic disparity of our communities that affect not only your employee base and your organizational, volunteers and participants in the communities you serve, but even our family members and generations. And it is different. And the work has to be addressed differently in a community like ours. There are several communities across the country that are identical to a Baltimore region, but certainly with all of the history of harm in our specific community, the work has to be approached just a little bit differently, I believe. And I say that because so many organizations outsource the work to, people way somewhere, Kansas somewhere doing this work remotely, and they don't get the Baltimore of it all, which is really important.
It's absolutely critical. The only thing I'll share in terms of resources, University of Baltimore also has a program that you might want to look into in addition to the resources shared. And at the conclusion of this conversation, we will be also sharing some resources. So it'll include some of what ABC has shared among some other things with all registrants as well.
And real quickly, if I can address civility, we really need that. Not only in our workspaces, but just in our communities, because just with a lot of the rhetoric that's going on lately, people are not civil. They're not nice. They're not kind. And so it's something that we definitely.
Well, thank you all so much for this discussion. If we had more time, this is something we could certainly discuss for hours. I just want to take this opportunity to thank our panel for your insights. Thank all of you for certainly joining us. And I'm going to turn it back over to our president and CEO.
Thank you, Wayne. And now can you understand why we were so excited to have these three panelists? Thoughtful, very challenging in their assumptions and their recommendations, fearless in their determination to make sure that this work advances in their workplace, but broader than that. And thank you so much, Wayne, for organizing this session and moderating so well. I thank all of you. We had up to 75 or up to 78 people that were on the call throughout the duration. Thank all of you for joining today. Hopefully you learned or have been maybe thinking about the sense of how do I modify some of my practices based upon a few things that were shared today, like some key points or themes that emerged for me as I was listening during this discussion of things like the difference between equity and equality, moral imperative and business imperative, the importance of just being a good person. I think someone said it that way too, just being a good person. Enrolling supervisors and mid-level managers in the equity work in addition to the C-suite at an organization. Attempting to change hearts and minds while executing non-punitive behavior change, or as was said so wonderfully, accountability without clear expectation is harassment. And so much more was discussed today. So many good ideas were shared, as well as a lot of actionable, I believe, steps that you can adapt and adopt. So I encourage each of you to just sort of lean into this learning journey to support equity, inclusion, and opportunity in your respective workplaces. And we'll keep you posted on future discussions, opportunities on what I like to call the fierce urgency of now topic that we're just discussing today. Thank you all so very much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you soon. Thank you all.
Thank you.